How do you manage 50 years on the road with such an aggressive touring schedule?
Yeah, I guess we started young enough to where we didn't know any different.
When news broke on July 28, 2021, that Dusty Hill's ZZ Top's legendary bassist and vocalist had died in his sleep at home in Houston, Texas, the shock rippled across the music world like a thunderclap. Dusty wasn't just a fixture of the band, he was one of the pillars that held the whole thing up. For over 5 decades, he stood beside Billy Gibbons and Frank Beard, forming one of the longest-running lineups in rock history. Fans around the globe were stunned. One day, Dusty was part of the band's tour, cracking jokes, laying down those iconic bass lines, and the next, he was gone. No final show, no farewell, just an empty space on stage where a giant once stood. The loss felt seismic not just for the band or the fans, but for rock and roll itself. ZZ Top wasn't about flashy drama or constant reinvention. They were steady, soulful, and real. And Dusty Hill, with his long beard, dark shades, and humble nature, was the embodiment of that spirit. His presence was felt even in silence, his groove unmistakable, his quiet power holding songs like Tush, Log Range, and Cheap Sunglasses together in a way that never called attention to itself, but without it, something essential would have been missing. The grief was immediate. Social media filled with tributes from fans, musicians, and critics. Even people who couldn't name a single ZZ Top album knew Dusty by look and by feel. He had become more than a rock star. He was a symbol of consistency in an industry that often burns bright and fades fast, but the pain of Dusty's death was felt most deeply by those who shared the road with him, not just in the physical sense, but in spirit. Billy Gibbons, ZZ Top's lead guitarist and vocalist, had spent more than 50 years beside him, on stage and off. They weren't just bandmates, they were brothers in every sense of the word. Together with drummer Frank Beard, they formed a bond that weathered the storms of fame, fatigue, and time itself. That kind of loyalty in rock music is incredibly rare. Where other bands splintered and reformed, where egos clashed and lineups shifted, ZZ Top remained unchanged. 3 guys from Texas playing bluesy rock with heart and swagger. Dusty was the steady one, the quiet one, the guy who never needed the spotlight because the music said it all. His death wasn't just the loss of a friend. It was the unraveling of a fabric that had been woven over half a century. Fans wondered how the band would go on, whether it even could without Dusty. But even more pressing was the silence from Billy Gibbons. The man who had shared every hotel room, every backstage laugh, every mile of tour bus travel with Dusty. What would he say now? When Gibbons finally broke his silence, what he revealed wasn't just grief, it was a rare, intimate glimpse into their brotherhood and into Dusty's final days. In the weeks that followed, Gibbons opened up slowly, revealing the kind of love and respect that can't be faked. He shared that Dusty had been battling multiple health problems in private: chronic bursitis, ulcers, and pain in his hip and shoulder that would have taken most people off the road years earlier. But Dusty kept playing, kept showing up, because that's who he was. Gibbons remembered seeing him move a little slower, feeling something wasn't quite right, but Dusty always brushed it off. He never wanted pity. He never wanted to be the guy who made a big deal about his health. He wanted to rock, and even in pain, he gave it everything he had. In their final rehearsal together, Gibbons said Dusty was focused, present, laughing, just Dusty being Dusty. But as the first performance neared, he started to fade a bit. His energy dipped. He told Billy, quietly, that he wanted to see a doctor. That he needed a break to get himself sorted out. There was no drama, no fear. Just a man acknowledging that maybe, for the first time in a long time, he couldn't push through. Dusty went home to Houston, intending to rest, to recover, and then return. But that night, as he lay down to sleep, he never woke up. Gibbons described it as lights out, his voice cracking with emotion. There was no drawn-out decline, no final goodbye. Just a peaceful passing that left a storm of heartbreak in its wake. For Gibbons, the days that followed were a haze. In interviews, he admitted that he wept openly and unexpectedly. "I had a couple of moments with the waterworks," he said, "and I realized maybe I am human after all." Coming from a man known for his cool demeanor and unshakable confidence, this was a raw admission. But that's what Dusty's death did. it cracked something open. Gibbons wasn't just mourning a collaborator, he was grieving someone who had been a constant in his life longer than most marriages last. They had shared dreams, failures, successes, and laughter for over half a century. That kind of connection is irreplaceable. Gibbons even quoted a fellow musician who had once lost a bandmate, saying, "I feel like I've lost a great friend." And that went well beyond another musician. It was a sentiment Gibbons echoed with full heart. Dusty was more than just the man with the bass, he was the soul of the band. And in that loss, something fundamental had shifted. Still, there was one thing Dusty made sure of before stepping away. He wanted the music to continue. Before leaving the tour, he told Billy, "Give L with the bottom end and take it to the top." That was Dusty's way of giving his blessing. Even in his final days, he was thinking about the fans, about the band, about the rhythm that had driven his life. And so, Billy Gibbons and Frank Beard chose to honor that wish. Elwood Francis, Dusty's longtime guitar tech, stepped in to play bass, a role he took not as a replacement, but as a guardian of Dusty's legacy. The band continued, not out of obligation, but out of respect, because Dusty didn't want the lights to dim. He wanted the sound to go on, the grooves to roll, the fans to smile. Gibbons described it best when he said, "Dusty didn't want to make a big deal about anything. He just wanted the music to keep moving." That was the essence of who he was, a man who lived for the art, not the attention. Looking back, the signs were there: the step away from touring, the subtle pain, the quiet moments, but Dusty never wanted to stop. He gave until his body couldn't give any more. And when he went, he did so with the same grace and humility that defined his life. For the fans, the void he left was massive. People remembered where they were the first time they heard Sharp-Dressed Man or saw's Easy Top live. They remembered that thundering bass line and the cool, calm man behind it. And they mourned not just for the music, but for the man who had given it all without ever asking for anything in return. Now, as Easy Top plays on, the spirit of Dusty Hill is never far from the stage. His bass lines live on, his voice echoes in the halls of rock history. And for Billy Gibbons, every note is a reminder of the brother he lost and the journey they shared. Fans will forever see the Beards, hear the riffs, feel the beat, and know that Dusty is still there, in spirit, holding down the groove. And maybe that's the most fitting tribute of all. In a world where fame often fades, Dusty Hill left something permanent. He didn't need headlines or controversy. He just needed a bass, a mic, and two brothers by his side. His was a legacy built not on flash, but on feeling, not on noise, but on nuance. And for those who knew him, whether personally or through his music, that's what will endure. The show, as Dusty wished, must go on. But it will never be quite the same. They say that legends aren't born. They're forged in small-town bars, on sleepless nights, in the backseats of vans, and on stages where no one's watching. That was Easy Top's story. Before they ever became icons, Billy Gibbons, Dusty Hill, and Frank Beard were just three musicians with a dream and a sound that didn't quite fit into anyone's mold. But what they had, what made them different, was grit. They understood the value of perseverance, the kind that keeps you playing even when there are more empty seats than fans in the crowd. They understood the importance of staying true to their sound, even when the industry pushed them to change. And above all, they knew the power of creative control, of building something from the ground up and owning every piece of it. The long years of hard travel, failed gigs, and uncertain paychecks built the kind of foundation you can't fake. It's what made Easy Top more than just a rock band. It made them a brotherhood. And when Dusty passed away, it was more than the loss of a bandmate. It was a fracture in the very heart of that bond. Gibbons admitted it hit him harder than he expected. He described it as an emotional and spiritual blow, one that left him feeling unmoored. In an interview, he said, "It was an unexpected reality that landed not only in my lap, but allowed me to hunker down and get serious with Mr. Beard." That quiet reflection, the acknowledgement that something sacred had been lost, was the beginning of a very personal and very public reckoning. Billy Gibbons remembered Dusty Hill's last words vividly. Before stepping away from touring due to his declining health, Dusty had made a decision. He had chosen Elwood Francis, Gibbons' longtime guitar tech, as his substitute. Not just as a fill-in, but as his personal pick to carry on the music in his place. Dusty, who was rarely forceful in conversation, made sure this message landed with clarity. The show must go on. Don't forget it, he told Gibbons, pointing his finger and repeating it with such firmness that Billy knew, without question, that this was what Dusty truly wanted. That sentence, simple, direct, and heavy with meaning, became the guiding principle for what followed. Gibbons and Frank Beard, now faced with a decision no band ever wants to make, chose to honor Dusty. Not with silence, but with sound. As an honor to the legacy of the band, Gibbons said, "We felt it would be more suitable to try to pick up sticks and carry on, rather than just throw in the towel. It wasn't about ego, it wasn't even about legacy. It was about love for the music, for each other, and for the fans who had grown up with ZZ Top's sound in their veins." Gibbons released a public statement that echoed this sentiment. "ZZ Top will soldier on," he declared, a promise to the band, to Dusty, and to everyone who ever found a part of themselves in the band's music. The choice of Elwood Francis wasn't born out of convenience, or as a marketing move, or even as a clean transition. It was personal, rooted in history and trust. Elwood had been with ZZ Top for over 3 decades, tuning guitars, managing gear, and being part of the family behind the scenes. He wasn't just familiar with the band, he was woven into its DNA, and, most importantly, it was Dusty's choice. That made it sacred. When Elwood stepped on stage to fill in for Dusty, it wasn't as a replacement, it was as an extension of Dusty's will. Gibbons described Elwood's presence as a surprise blessing. "It's quite a trip having Elwood step in to help keep the ball rolling," he said. "He's adding a great bit of enthusiasm. When I see Frank Beard smiling for the first time in 30 years, I know something good's happening." There was a poetic twist to during the long pause brought on by the pandemic. Elwood had grown a full beard. It wasn't intentional, but it meant that the visual identity of ZZ Top, those unmistakable silhouettes with hats and beards and shades, remained intact. Elwood came from a punk rock background, but instead of disrupting the ZZ Top sound, he somehow amplified it. "You might even consider us being somewhat new as a band," Gibbons joked. "Which we are. It's really entertaining, I'll say." That, in honoring Dusty's last wish, Billy and Frank showed the world that resilience isn't just about carrying on, it's about carrying the spirit forward with honesty and purpose, and the world responded in kind. As ZZ Top returned to the stage, tributes began pouring in, not just from fans, but from some of the biggest names in rock history. Ozzy Osbourne tweeted, "Rest in peace Dusty Hill, a great musician and a great guy. I always enjoyed being around him." Slash of Guns N' Roses called him a rock and roll legend through and through, praising his tone, his style, and his unmistakable presence. Flea from the Red Hot Chili Peppers, one of the most influential bassists of his own era, wrote, "Dusty Hill was one of the first bass players I admired. He made that bottom end move like thunder," and Paul Stanley of Kiss described Dusty as a gentleman and a true original, the kind of player whose groove was the glue that held the entire band together. These tributes weren't just empty condolences, they were heartfelt recognitions from peers who understood what it meant to create something real and lasting. Dusty Hill wasn't flashy, he wasn't loud, but his presence was felt by every artist who ever played beside him or grew up listening to him. Even outside of rock, Dusty's legacy reached deep. Country singer Jason Isbell said, "Dusty Hill helped define an era. You felt his bass in your chest." Blues guitarist Joe Bonamassa noted, "Dusty never strayed from the roots. He loved the blues and brought it to the masses with style and humor." Fans around the world joined in, creating murals, tribute shows, and heartfelt memorials online and in their hometowns. In Houston, a large mural of Dusty was painted by local artists, immortalizing the man who had brought so much pride to the Texas music scene. But perhaps the most emotional moment came during a ZZ Top concert shortly after Dusty's death, when it was time to play Tush, one of their biggest hits. Billy Gibbons stepped back from the microphone and allowed Dusty's recorded vocals to fill the venue. There, on stage, a single microphone stood tall, and atop it, Dusty's iconic head rested, casting a long shadow across the stage. The crowd fell into silence, then erupted into cheers, many wiping away tears as Dusty's voice rang out once more. It wasn't a gimmick, it wasn't theater. It was a moment of shared grief and gratitude, of letting go while holding on. That hat wasn't just a costume piece. It was a part of Dusty's soul, his quiet power, his unique mark on music history. By placing it on that microphone, Gibbons turned a symbol into a shrine. It said, without words, he's still with us, and that's what makes Dusty Hill's legacy so enduring. It's not just about the music, although the music is unforgettable. It's about the bond he helped forge, the spirit he infused into every note, and the quiet strength with which he walked through the world. Dusty Hill didn't chase fame, he earned respect. And now, with every performance, every cheer, every chord, ZZ Top keeps his memory alive not as a ghost, but as a guiding light.